You shamed our family. That's what my mother said when she saw me wearing the hijab for the first time. My father simply turned his face away and whispered, I prefer to think you're dead. And my best friend blocked me on all social media. To them, I had crossed a line with no return. But what they never understood is that was the first time in my entire life I truly felt alive. It wasn't because of anyone's influence. It wasn't romance. It wasn't confusion. It was a calling that pierced through the layers of my culture, my pride, and even my original religion. A sound, a book, a truth that found me after I had stopped looking. My name is Miriam Cohen. I'm 43 years old, born in Jerusalem, raised among the sacred hills of Jewish faith. And today, I live in Toronto, Canada. I'm a historian, the daughter of a rabbi, educated in the best religious schools, and for a long time, I thought I knew everything about God. But it was only when I began listening, alone, to the adhan through the window of a hotel in Morocco, that I realized I had never truly surrendered. Before we continue, comment below with the country you're watching from. And if you've ever gone through a moment where everything you believed was put to the test, subscribe to the channel. Because this story isn't about changing religion. It's about hearing, for the first time, the sound of truth within your own soul. I was born into faith. It wasn't a choice. It was the world where I took my first steps. At home, Shabbat was sacred. The candles lit on Friday night, the songs, the braided bread. All of it was part of my soul. I was raised with reverence for the Torah, respect for the commandments, love for our roots. My father was a rabbi, my mother taught at a Jewish girls' school, and from an early age, I was trained to honor our history and never question it. But I questioned, silently. At 12, I wondered why God felt so distant, so ritualized, so tied to gestures. At 16, I began to notice that much was done out of habit, not conviction. The prayers were beautiful, but felt empty to me. I felt guilty for thinking this way. After all, I had everything: tradition, identity, belonging. And still, at night, before sleeping, I would pray alone, in a way no one had taught me. No formulas, just me and God. And I would silently ask, if there's something more, show me. For years, I hid this conflict behind books. I dove into my studies, went to university, studied philosophy, comparative religions, Middle Eastern history. It was my way of seeking without betrayal, of questioning without confrontation. I became a specialist in ancient texts, especially about women in religious contexts. And that's when everything began to open. The more I read about other traditions, the more I saw similarities, and the more I noticed what was missing in my experience with God: intimacy, direction, living truth. Because as much as I loved my heritage, and still do, there was something in it that didn't answer the question my heart kept asking. Does God see me as a woman? As an individual soul? Or just as part of a lineage that must obey in silence? I had no answers. And no one around me seemed willing to hear those questions without labeling them as rebellion, so I stayed quiet, continued with the rituals, the holidays, the appearance. But inside, something was fading, until the day an academic trip to North Africa, under the pretext of studying women in Islam, turned into something no scholarly article could have predicted. The destination was Fez, Morocco, a vibrant city where the past walks hand in hand with the present. I went there to research the presence of women in early Islamic records. I wanted to understand how the Quran viewed women, what their voices were in tradition, whether there was room for autonomy within that religious structure. My intention was purely academic. But something happened. In the first few days, I noticed that the Islam I studied in books was very different from what I saw in the eyes of the women around me. They didn't seem oppressed, nor submissive. There was a silent dignity in their gestures, a confidence in their words, a peace that left me unsettled. Some wore veils, others niqab, others just a modest scarf, but all of them seemed moved by something I still didn't understand. And somehow I envied. I spoke with a local professor named Yasmina. She welcomed me with mint tea and a sincere smile. When I asked if she felt Islam limited women, she replied with gentleness and firmness, Islam didn't limit me. It liberated me. It was the first time I knew I didn't need the approval of men to have value before God. That shook me. Because I, with all my diplomas, had never felt that. I returned to the hotel that afternoon and opened my suitcase. I took out the Quran I had brought only as a study object, and for the first time, I didn't read it with critical eyes, but with hungry ones. And there, already in the opening surahs, I came across something unexpected. A God who spoke with me. Not about me. With me. It wasn't an easy read, but there was a clarity, a strength, and a tenderness I had never felt in the texts I grew up hearing. Islam wasn't about rules. It was about direction. Submission, yes. But not to men. To God. And there, alone in that hotel room, with the window open to the Moroccan sky, I began to understand that my search for God wasn't beginning. It was returning home. And it was that same night, with my heart racing, that I heard a sound coming from the street. A sound that passed through my body like an ancient calling. It was that same night, with my heart racing, that I heard a sound coming from the street. A sound that passed through my body like an ancient calling. It was the adhan, the call to prayer. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but there was something in those sung words, echoing between the rooftops of the city, that made me stop. I was sitting on the bed, but it felt like my whole body had frozen. I didn't understand all the words, but I understood the spirit. It was a summons, not to religion, but to surrender. Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. Those 3 words, repeated with reverence, struck the ground of my certainties like a hammer, because there, alone in a foreign room, with a sacred book in my lap, I knew, yes, God is greater. Greater than the structures I built to understand the world. Greater than the rules I had memorized. Greater than the fear that kept me from going beyond what I was taught. I walked to the window. I looked at the empty street, lit by yellow lamps and the shy moon in the sky. And I kept listening, as if that voice wasn't coming from outside, but from within. Part of me was crying, without knowing why. Another part, for the first time in a long time, was quiet. In that moment, I understood that what I called faith was, in truth, attachment. Attachment to a heritage, to an image, to cultural security. But God, He was not the property of a people. He was the owner of all. And that voice echoing from the minarets on that Moroccan night seemed to remind me, you've always belonged to me. You just forgot. I closed the window, returned to the bed, held the Quran like someone holds something sacred, not because I understood everything, but because I already felt it. God wasn't far. He wasn't behind empty rituals. He was there. And He had just called me by name, without saying a word. After that night, the Quran stopped being a study object. I began reading it with the door locked, the lights low, and my heart on alert. I was still afraid, not of the content, but of what it was doing to me, because the more I read, the more I cried. And the more I cried, the less I recognized myself. I had already read sacred texts from various traditions, but there, for the first time, I felt I wasn't just reading something. I was being read. Every verse seemed to know my secret questions, my silences, my conflicts. There were passages that spoke with such clarity that for a few seconds, I would close the book, look at the ceiling, and whisper, how is this here? How does this know me? In Surah Maryam, I read about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and cried like a child, not because it was a new story, but because, for the first time, I saw a woman exalted, defended, honored by God. Without needing to prove anything to anyone, her strength pierced through me. I felt like I was reading about myself, a woman judged, misunderstood, but protected by a greater presence. On another night, I came across the phrase, "He is closer to you than your jugular vein." I closed the book, held it to my chest. And there, in the silence of a hotel room, far from my homeland, far from my family, far from the image I had always defended of myself, I broke down. Not from sadness, but from recognition. He had always been here. I was the one who had never stopped to listen. Reading the Quran wasn't me converting. It was me coming back to myself. Verse by verse, I was being cleansed of everything that weighed me down, of guilt, of intellectual arrogance, of rigidity, until the academic Miriam, the rabbi's daughter, the woman full of certainties, grew silent. And then, for the first time, it was my soul that spoke. That's when I understood. It wasn't Islam entering me. It was God finally having space to reveal Himself. After weeks of reading in secret, praying alone, and trying to reorganize my inner world, I made a decision. I needed to enter a mosque. Not to declare myself Muslim, not yet, but to be in that space where so many bow and see if I would find my place too. I chose a small mosque in the Parkdale neighborhood of Toronto. Modest, without a golden dome or spotlights. I took a scarf in my bag, the Quran in my hands, and my heart pounding. I didn't know exactly how to behave. I didn't know the rituals, but something told me that if I took one sincere step, God would take care of the rest. I entered through the side door reserved for women, took off my shoes, and was welcomed by a soft scent of wood and clean carpet. There was a group of women sitting in silence, some reading, others with their eyes closed. An older lady looked at me with tenderness and pointed to an empty space. She didn't ask me anything. She didn't judge me. She just smiled. I put on the scarf slowly, with trembling hands, sat on the floor, closed my eyes, and heard, for the first time on Canadian soil, the adhan echoing inside a mosque. It was the same sound that broke me in Morocco, but now it was putting me back together. The prayer began. I observed every gesture carefully. When they all stood, I stood. When they bowed, I bowed. When they prostrated to the ground, I hesitated for a second, but I went. And there, with my forehead pressed against the rug, something inside me exploded in silence. There were no words, no explanation. But in that gesture, the simplest and the deepest, my soul screamed what my lips still didn't dare to say, I am yours. The prayer ended. The women hugged, wished each other peace, and returned to their lives. I remained there for a few minutes. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to leave. Because for the first time, after a lifetime of seeking belonging in labels and titles, I felt at home. I left the mosque with tears still in my eyes, but my feet steady. I knew there was no turning back. I hadn't said the Shahada yet. I hadn't told my family. But something essential had already been sealed. And from that moment on, all that remained was courage. After that prayer, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. There was no more room to live between worlds. What had been a silent search had become certainty. And faith, to be true faith, had to be lived, even if it cost everything. I started with the hardest part, my family. I wrote a letter by hand, 3 pages. Long, careful. I explained that I was still the same Miriam, that I wasn't rejecting my origin, that I wasn't denying my history, but that I had found in Islam the answer I had searched for all my life. I said it wasn't about rebellion, nor influence. It was about obedience. Not to men, but to God. The response came quickly. Short and cold. My mother called. Her voice trembled. This is an insult to our home, a betrayal. She cried, but not out of longing. She cried out of shame. My father didn't even speak to me. He told my sister, she's no longer part of our family. It hurt, like nothing else ever had. Rejection from those who taught me how to pray, who placed the first mezuzah on the door of my childhood. But at the same time, I felt something strange, a peace that didn't come from them, and that nothing could take from me. At work, I was subtle. I started wearing the hijab, first loosely, then more firmly. Some colleagues asked gently, others with sarcasm. I heard things like, "Are you okay? Is this because of a man? But you were so smart," I replied with a smile and silence, because only those who have been in the dark know the value of a lit lamp. I lost friends. I lost invitations. I lost the right to be the model daughter. But I gained something that years of tradition, study, and prestige never gave me: inner freedom. And then I understood something I had never seen in the stories of the women I studied: that true faith doesn't come without pain, but it is precisely the pain that reveals who you are and in whom you believe. I was no longer the perfect daughter, the respected intellectual, the exemplary Jew. But finally, I was me. After everything, the rejection, the silence, the judgment, there was only one thing left: the word. The declaration that turns a seeking soul into a surrendered one. The Shahada. I waited for the right day. I wanted it to be intimate. No audience, no cameras, just me, my heart, and God. I chose a small mosque, attended by women who had already quietly welcomed me. I was accompanied by Yasmina, the Moroccan professor who had become my friend and my bridge. Before the noon prayer, the imam was called. He didn't ask why. He only said, "Are you sure?" I answered, "Yes, there's no turning back." I was brought to the front, with a few sisters around me. The hall was silent, a silence full of light. The Imam recited the words. I repeated them too. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah. When I finished, something invisible broke. It was as if the air had changed in density. The tears came effortlessly. I wasn't crying out of emotion. I cried out of relief, as if I had carried, for decades, a suitcase that wasn't mine. And now, finally, I could set it down. The women hugged me. Some cried with me. Others simply held my hand firmly. And in that simple gesture, I felt something I had never experienced within my own tradition. Spiritual belonging without social expectation. I didn't have to explain my story or prove my faith. I just had to say, I believe. And God did the rest. I returned home that afternoon in silence, my face still wet, but my heart dry, healed, free. That day, I didn't change religions. That day, I gave my soul back to the one who created it. Today, I am still Miriam. I still carry my name, my story, my memory. I didn't deny who I was. I simply recognized who I am, and to whom I've always belonged. I wear the hijab with dignity, not as a symbol of oppression, but as a flag of freedom. It doesn't cover me. It reveals me, because for the first time, my faith doesn't demand that I please anyone's eyes, only that I obey the one who created me. My relationship with my family is still fragile. My mother calls me now and then. She doesn't talk about what happened, but asks if I'm eating well. It's her way of saying, I still love you. And I understand, because if it took me a lifetime to see the truth, why would I expect others to see it right away? At the university, I still teach. But now, when I speak about religion, I don't speak only with my mind. I speak with my heart, not just as a scholar, but as a believer, as a witness. And if someone asks me what changed since I became Muslim, I answer with a calm smile. Everything. Because now, even silence has meaning. Today, my prayer is my refuge. My fasting is my strength. My veil is my choice. And my submission is my greatest triumph. I didn't stop being a woman. I didn't disappear. I didn't shrink. On the contrary, today, I am whole. Because it was in Islam that I found the God who sees me, not as a piece of a system, but as a unique soul, created with purpose and loved without condition. And it was the moment I stopped running that he reached me.